Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. Busy show for us. We're happy you're a part of it. It's Terrence Edwards a little bit later on. New information about the world's largest outdoor cocktail party that some are having, I would say, varied reactions to. We'll talk a little bit about that on the program here today. But off the top, heading into another big recruiting weekend for Georgia where massive visitors are expected to be on hand. I think there's some interesting things out there right now about the recruiting philosophy in place at Georgia and what it does to set itself up for the kinds of wins it's hoping to gain over the course of the next few weeks. So I think that's a great place for us to start here today. So what do you say we do it? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
In getting ready for this show and preparing for what we're going to talk about here, I'm always listening to a lot of press conferences and a lot of, players, coaches saying things, and for whatever reason, from time to time, there's a word that sort of jumps out to me, and it kind of, it kind of gets my attention in a way that other words sort of don't. I'm going to give you an example of this here. The other day, Kirby Smart was at the SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida. This took place while I was on vacation, but we've been kind of unpacking some of this since I've been back. And at the beginning of that media exchange, one of the national guys who was there asked Kirby Smart about the recruiting budget at Georgia, the fact that Georgia spends so much more on recruiting than almost any of the program, not almost, certainly than anybody else does, and frankly by a pretty wide margin. And Kirby kind of went into the answer on that. Most of what Kirby said is not new information to those who follow Georgia closely. This is stuff we've kind of talked about before, explaining the difference between how Georgia operates and how other places operate. But I want you to listen to this clip nonetheless, because there's a word that Smart uses, and he uses it in reference to this particular topic, but I believe it can be expanded and looked at in the avenue of recruiting even beyond just what Kirby Smart was talking about right here. So let me let you hear this. It sets us up for where else we want to go today. The notion of Georgia spending so much money to produce all these elite recruiting classes. Listen to Kirby here and see if you can pick out the word that jumped out to me. Here's Kirby.
What do you get for $4.5 million at Georgia?
I think there's a little misnomer to that.
Okay.
I don't think that you'd have to really study the numbers, and I don't know how much you guys dig into accounting methods, but we don't have a school plane, so start with that. So if someone has a school plane, let's say they take 100 flights in that plane. They're not counting those 100 flights. We might take 100 flights that we purchase. So our recruiting numbers are imbalanced based on that. Now, do we spend on recruiting? Absolutely. Does the SEC school spend on recruiting? Absolutely. Is it necessary to be competitive? It is, and our administration's been great about supporting us. But the numbers that people put out, some of those were eye-popping and catching, where some people are counting their methods a lot differently in terms of, especially flights, which is our number one expense.
You're not ashamed of it. It can't hurt.
Well, I don't know that I want to be efficient.
Yeah.
We make decisions and we're conscious of budgets and we try to be smart. So I'm not sitting here. We got to do what we got to do to compete.
So, as I said before, a lot of Georgia fans are familiar with what Kirby Smart's talking about there. One of the reasons why it seems like Georgia spends so much money in recruiting is because every time Georgia takes a flight, and they take a lot of them because thankfully Georgia allows its coaches to go out there and be face-to-face and visit with recruits all across the country as much as it possibly can. But every time it does that, it sort of shows up as a line item on the budget. It kind of shows up as a debit, if you will, as a little bit of a loss, if you will, because Georgia doesn't own its own plane, could very easily do so. It just chooses to sort of account for it this way, and that's why it seems like Georgia's recruiting budget is so much in excess of everybody else. That's just true. The reporter then comes back to say, yeah, but you're not ashamed of the money that you spend, right? And Kirby says, no, of course not. We want to invest in recruiting. We want to be great at that. But then he goes on to use the word that sort of jumped out to me. He says, but we also want to be efficient there as well. In other words, we don't want to just spend money for spending money's sake. We don't want to just go out there and just sort of throw money at a problem and hope that solves it. We want to be efficient in how we use our money. And I think that word is so important. And I do think I've always been kind of fascinated by the operation of the recruiting process, that it's not just about, cool edits on social media or even NIL on a day like this. that there is something about the entire operation that sort of works to kind of draw recruits to you and draw recruits to your program. And Kirby says, hey, we want to be efficient in how we go about this, efficient in how we choose to use our finances. But I would say that's not the only place that you need to be efficient in recruiting. And I would also say that's not the only place that Georgia has proven some efficiency overall. Just the same way that finances are kind of a finite resource. Even if you're Georgian, you're a very well-resourced program, you've got a lot of money to spend, it is still a finite resource. In other words, you make it spend $4.5 million, but you're going to spend $4.5 billion, right? It's money's not unlimited when it comes to stuff like this. You have to be somewhat efficient about how you choose to spend your money. I would say you have to be somewhat efficient in other areas there as well, because energy is also a little bit of a finite resource. That you can go out and kind of spread yourself far and wide across the country. You can pursue all the best players, but you're going to have to make some choices about how you choose to operate and how you choose to sort of spend the energy going after players, because eventually you're just going to run out of energy. There's only so much human potential to kind of go around, and eventually you kind of use all that up. And recruiting is never like hungry hippos, where you're just out there banging and slamming and grabbing and trying to collect whatever talent you can have. Frankly, we see examples of how that doesn't quite always work out. Texas A&M, I would say, is a little bit of an example of that. I would say that Miami is also a little bit of an example of that, too, that just because you win some recruiting battles doesn't mean you actually show up to be a very good football team on the field. That those are programs that have had recruiting success, but frankly, it doesn't really feel very efficient because it seems like there's a lot of wasted potential there, or it seems like some of the recruiting efforts to bring in talented players have ended up being talented players that don't really fit all that well with a winning football team. And this is not new information. Most of you have probably noticed that there as well. So I was thinking about that this morning before our show began, about the fact that as Georgia pursues greatness, it pursues efficiency in recruiting, and some of that is financial efficiency, as Kirby Smart talked about. But I think some of that also kind of comes in a different form of efficiency there as well. And this sort of ties back into what we talked about yesterday, where we kind of mentioned the fact that Bud Elliott, a guy that I like, is a pretty smart dude from 24/7 Sports, does his blue chip ratio every year, the percentage of former 4- and 5-star recruits on every roster dating back to the previous 4 years, and how you have to be kind of above the threshold of 50% to have a chance to win the national championship. And we sort of talked yesterday about the fact that Georgia, you might think, would be number 1 on this list, just given all the recruiting wins that it's had, but it's actually only number 3. It's 77% in comparison to Ohio State, which had, I think, 85%, Alabama, which had 90%. And listen, I don't want to get this twisted or get this wrong. Georgia's not a plucky underdog because it's only got 77% of its roster as former 4- and 5-star players. That's simply not the case. But we did sort of notice yesterday that, well, Georgia does have less former 4- and 5-star guys than Alabama and Ohio State. So how come Georgia's won the last 2 national championships? How come it is that Georgia beat Ohio State last year and beat Alabama the previous year? And what we said was, and we heard Kirby Smart in his own words say this, what we said is that Georgia seemingly had a question that it wanted to ask of each of its recruits, which is, how much do you want to win? How much do you hate losing? We heard some very good audio from Kirby Smart on that yesterday. So if you missed yesterday's show, a lot of you kind of catch up later this time of year. So I'll invite you to go back and listen to yesterday's show because it was really good. Kirby Smart had some terrific things to say going back to January about the way in which Georgia scouts and identifies talent. And that one big question is a big question that Georgia asks of the recruits that it brings in of, do you hate losing? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to win? And if you are, even if you're a 3-star recruit, a la Javon Bullard, or a la, a Jordan Davis, or a la, even, sometimes lesser recruits like a Ladd McConkey or, a Stetson Bennett, former walk-on, that if you hate losing, if you love winning, if you're willing to do what it takes to pay the price, to be that kind of player, then even as a lesser recruit, you can end up being one of the most important players on Georgia's roster. And we talked about that yesterday. That's a big question that Georgia asks on its way to being efficient in recruiting, making sure it's pursuing the kind of players that will really contribute to a championship. But in light of that, what we said yesterday, there's another question I believe that Georgia also asks, and this is something I don't think you need to miss, because we're in a day and age right now where the transfer portal is more prevalent than it's ever been, and programs are using NIL as a way to lure players out of the transfer portal in a way that was kind of unforeseen as recently as a few years ago. And everybody's trying to figure this out. And some teams are trying to leverage that to their advantage. They want to be the most aggressive in the transfer portal. And they want to go out and steal players off other guys' rosters. I mean, Ole Miss, for example, essentially made that like its number one calling card. Transfer to the SIP. That's what they call the state of Mississippi. They say, they've basically made the sort of transfer nomenclature a big part of their entire pitch as a program. Well, Kirby Smart has said we want to approach this a little bit differently, which sort of leads to, I think, the next question that Kirby Smart asks of the recruits that come into this program as a way of maintaining UGA's efficiency in recruiting. To set this up, I want you to hear from Kirby Smart again from the same press conference we just heard him from a moment ago. Smart was asked about what some coaches are kind of calling the problem of tampering right now. This means I'm a player on somebody's roster, and I've got other programs reaching out to me while I'm on someone's roster prior to going into the transfer portal, trying to get me into the portal and then ultimately getting me on their roster and away from the team that I'm currently on. Some coaches are very vocal talking about what a big problem this is. At times, I've been pretty vocal on this show saying what a big problem potentially I think this can be and how potentially problematic I think it is for college football if it doesn't enforce its rules. I've said before that you're only a sport to the extent that you have rules, and if you try to be lawless and ruleless, well, eventually the entire stability of the sport's going to be threatened. Well, Kirby Smart doesn't quite see it that way. Given multiple chances to talk about the issue of tampering the other day, Smart essentially shrugged off the problem. And in doing so, kind of explained what it is that makes Georgia a little bit different in all of this, that Georgia's just not simply pursuing the same kind of players that other programs are. Let me let you hear a little bit more of Kirby Smart, which sort of sets us up for that second question that I believe that Georgia's asking of its recruits right now. Here's Kirby again.
I don't really get caught up in it. I worry a lot more about my roster, and I say, how do we manage the people that we have so that they don't want to go somewhere else? So I focus on that. Not a lot of these teams have people on their staffs that go out and watch the opposing team on the field to write down how they look, how they run. They're surveying the field for the portal. We're not that elaborate. I mean, we're going to try to focus on our guys, and retention is probably more important to me than anything.
I just think that's really interesting to hear Kirby Smart say to us, retention is going to be more important than anything. In other words, I've got an opportunity to go out here and chase transfer portal guys, and at times Georgia will do that. Didn't do it in 2022, bringing in 3 for 2023, so it's not opposed to transfer players. But while Georgia has an opportunity to go out and maybe get a guy from the portal from time to time, it's got an obligation, Kirby says, to take care of the guys that are on the roster, which sort of leads me to that second question that I think that Georgia's asking of its high school recruits, because Kirby went on to say in this same press conference that you just heard a couple of clips from that for Georgia, high school football recruiting is always going to be more important than transfer portal recruiting, which kind of leads to the question that I believe that Georgia asks of its recruits. It's not only do you want to win, do you hate losing, are you willing to pay the price to be a winner, and if you are, that makes you more valuable no matter what your star rating is. The other question right now that I believe that Georgia asks of its recruits is, are you willing to stick around? Are you willing to stay in our program? Because that, I think, makes a recruit even more valuable to UGA. That you could just blindly go out and try to grab whatever talent that you can get and sort of throw it all together and hope, like some sort of all-star team, it comes together and you can go out there and just roll the ball out there and try to win games. But we have seen time and time again that college football is actually just more complicated than that. And it's not ever going to be quite that easy to build a winning team. So therefore, you got to try to find the guy that wants to be a part of your program. And Kirby knows it's going to lose transfer portal players. I think, in fact, he said that their kind of internal goal is to keep 70% of the players on the roster. They know they're going to have a few guys transfer, but if they can keep more than 2 out of every 3, then you have a chance to kind of try to create the stability that allows you to go out and build a championship team, and to circle back to the word that started this entire conversation, maintain that efficiency there as well. So from time to time, Kirby Smart gives us, I think, a pretty interesting window into how Georgia goes about its business. Clearly, bringing in talented players is a huge part of what Georgia's all about. As Bud Elliott showed us yesterday, more than 3 out of every 4 players Georgia signed the previous 4 years have either been a 4 or 5-star recruit. That is an elite recruiting level. But it's more than just grabbing talent. It's finding guys, as Kirby told us yesterday, that have an insatiable appetite for winning. And even if you're a lesser recruit, you're a valuable player if you view the game that way. And finding guys who are willing to stick it out at Georgia and stay here over the course of the long haul, choosing to view the long-term commitment that a high school player will give you over the short-term commitment that a transfer player will give you. That's also an important part of the Georgia formula there as well. We know that whatever Georgia's doing is working, but sometimes taking a chance to investigate exactly what Georgia is doing is pretty fascinating. How does it remain so efficient? Every now and then, Kirby Smart will let us know. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. We are so happy to have you with us, no matter how you join us, live on video, 10 a.m. across all the video platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Of course, even earlier than that on Athens. Actually, sorry, I'm getting my script messed up here. We start at 9:45 on our first and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. By now, you know that. I ought to be able to say that, but most of you can say it better than me just listening along here right now. Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. That is, of course, true. And podcasts, however you find them, all across the fruited plain of podcast platforms out there. We are on them all, and we're happy to have you with us here today. And so thankful to our friends at Meriwether and Tharp, who also make all of this possible there as well. And I know this time each week when you hear me talk about this subject, it's still jarring sometimes to hear it, the idea of divorce. Divorce is just really hard. I've been having some conversations with some folks lately about this. And, you know, in your own personal life, when it impacts you, it's just tough. And I can't sugarcoat that. I can't make it be different than it is. I really can't. But I think a lot of you are also aware there, too, that sometimes reality is not a thing to ignore or to sugarcoat or pretend it's different than it is. Sometimes reality is just a thing that has to be confronted. And sometimes the best way around it is to go through it. And if you find yourself in a situation where you do have to go through this right now, you've got no other choice, maybe you've tried to save that relationship, and it's just proven to be unsalvageable, that it is severed, it has come to an end, then the important conversation are next steps. What do you do next when you realize that the plan that you had for your life is not quite working out the way that you hoped that it would? Well, that's where our friends at Meriwether and Tharp come in, your source for Georgia divorce. I want you to find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com, theatlantadivorceteam.com. And I'll tell you this, here is how I judge the value of any person or organization or anything like that. It's what they're willing to give away for free. You know, what are they willing to do for me before they even know who I am? And I think there's a lot of generosity in place with Meriwether and Tharp because there are so many resources they could sort of hoard and keep to themselves, and you don't find out any of this until you hire them to be your attorney, and then they'll, you know, kind of give you what they know. But Meriwether and Tharp kind of leads with generosity here from the standpoint that if you go on their website, theatlantadivorceteam.com, you see blog posts, you see podcasts, you see all kinds of ways in which you can educate yourself about the divorce process before you actually make that decision to have that initial consultation with one of their attorneys and then hire them to work on your divorce process. They give a lot away to you for free at the very beginning of all of this. It's one of the reasons why I'm so confident in my recommendation of them for you if you find yourself in this situation. So please find them online. theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, coming up before we're done here in a couple of minutes, it's Terrence Edwards on a Thursday. I always love that. We'll have a good time talking to Terrence. I'm also going to give you an update on the great contest we have ongoing right now, courtesy of our friends at Kroger and Traeger Grills. We'll do that here in a couple of minutes there as well. Stand by if you have not gotten involved on that yet. Prior to that, I want to go around the Dawghouse. We got some interesting information yesterday. The Jacksonville Jaguars shared some renderings of what the brand new stadium, not totally brand new, but renovated stadium is going to look like there in Jacksonville if it does indeed get done here in a couple of years. And for Georgia fans, this has a lot of intrigue because, you know, after a couple of years of 2 more years beyond this year of playing the game in the current stadium, then a couple of years worth of renovation. Does this game remain in Jacksonville long term? And what would it look like if it was there? We got some pictures of that yesterday. So if you're watching on video, I'll show you a couple of these. Let me start with kind of the outside version of the stadium, how this would kind of look there in that Jacksonville skyline. Some people thought this was kind of a weird looking deal. Honestly, everybody online always criticizes everything that's new. I don't see anything wrong with this stadium complex there at all. I think it's just kind of what modern stadiums sort of look like. So I don't make too big of a deal about that one way or another. It's obviously a very different look for the Jacksonville skyline, but it's certainly an improved look over the current stadium, which is probably well beyond its shelf life in terms of keeping up with the typical NFL stadium, to be sure. So that, if you're watching on video, is kind of what this area would look like where the stadium currently is, obviously a huge upgrade. The thing that probably gets the most attention, though, is from the inside of the stadium, how different that could potentially look, because what you see right here is kind of a closed roof situation. This would be a retractable roof here, and I guess when the roof is open, it'd be a little bit like the Miami Stadium, for those of you who were at the Orange Bowl a couple of years ago, where maybe there's an overhang on a lot of the seats, creating a little bit more shadow effect, obviously, because down in South Florida it can get very hot. Jacksonville can be the same way. And the opportunity to close the roof when you want to. Here's what I'm going to tell you about the overall picture here. Kind of cool look, certainly very interesting artist renderings here. I want to reserve right for judgment on all of this because, on the one hand, I'm pro cocktail party, and I think the idea of being a part of an exciting new stadium complex, one in which they've certainly made Georgia, Florida, a big centerpiece of all this. The Jaguars have said prior to this, just a couple of months ago, that the most important football game played in Jacksonville every single year is not a Jaguars game. It's a Georgia, Florida game. They know how much this game means to the city. So Georgia, Florida being a big part of a brand new stadium situation here, I think could be kind of fun. However, I want to say also a very simple statement here there as well. It cannot be the world's largest outdoor cocktail party if you play it indoors. Like, you can't do that. So, cool stadium. I'm glad it's got a roof. If it rains for the Jaguars, I'm sure that's going to be cool. But you can't play the world's largest outdoor cocktail party inside of a dome stadium. I just don't think you can do that. If you want to keep the aesthetic, if you want to keep what's made this game special, I do think the roof's got to be open. So, to me, my initial reaction to this is the improved stadium, I think, improves the cocktail party, I think. But I don't want to play this game indoors. Playing the SEC Championship in Atlanta indoors in December, absolutely. Playing college football playoff games in dome stadiums where you have kind of a controlled atmosphere for that seems to make some sense there as well. But the outdoor cocktail party needs to be played outdoors. I think that's probably about as simple as that. So let's reserve judgment on this a little bit to kind of find out more about it, but I don't see anything that's a total game changer for me in terms of changing the way that I felt about the cocktail party, but I don't want to play with a roof over my head. And I think I probably feel that way even if it's raining, although I'm sure if it's raining, they probably would close the roof there in that particular situation. So an interesting look at a new stadium complex, a new stadium idea, and we'll see what the long-term future is for the cocktail party here, I'm sure, coming up in the very near future there as well. For now, that is Around the Dawghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today. And before we bring on Terrence Edwards, let me also give you a big reminder. We're in that time of year, heading towards the 4th of July. We're kind of thinking about our country. Obviously, we just came across Memorial Day, which is the time we kind of think about those who paid the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate price for those who've served our country. And moving ahead to Independence Day, our nation's birthday. And obviously, there's so much that so many of us are so proud of about our country this time of year. And I think that DawgNation's kind of stepping up in honor of that right now to do a promotion that we're calling Celebrating America's Heroes. And we're doing that courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. And here's how it works. Someone's going to win a Traeger Ironwood XL grill. This is an amazing grill. It's like a $2,000 value. This is a big-time product here for sure. And they're also going to win a Kroger $500 gift card to give you some food to go on that grill. So really an amazing thing here. And here's how you can be a winner. You're going to simply go online to DawgNation.com, upload a short video or a photo, and tell the story of an American hero in your own life. This could really be anything. My dad was a Vietnam veteran. My father-in-law was a Vietnam veteran. Both of my grandfathers served in the armed forces. It could be a story like that of some person from the armed forces in your past, and you just want their story to be known. Or it could be kind of the common, average, everyday American hero that we all come in contact with, who are going to go above and beyond to make our lives and our communities better. Teachers, firemen, policemen, things like that. There's all kinds of examples of how folks, just average, everyday folks, have served their country or served their community, and all of that adds together to make the fabric of our country what it is. And Traeger Grills and Kroger, they want to honor that, and they want you to help them do that there at DawgNation.com. So go online, upload a video, a photograph, tell the story of an American hero in your own life, and the story that you tell could make you a big winner, courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. So you've got between now and June 17th to get your submission in, and we'll start announcing a winner after that. So get involved, DawgNation.com, and you can find out more about this, get all the full details about the contest, but also submit your entry that could make you a winner, courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. We're very excited about doing that here this time of year. All right, before we're done, a little bit of controversy about something that a lot of college football fans are really excited about. We'll tell you what this is about. But for now, everything on Georgia football here. A great guy to talk to all of this about. I hadn't had a chance to catch up with him in a couple of weeks. I was gone last week, but we'll get back to it here today. It is Terrence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So happy to have Terrence Edwards back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp here today. And Terrence, haven't had a chance to catch up with you the last couple of weeks. Glad to be able to do that with you here today. I was just showing some pictures a moment ago of the new Jacksonville Stadium, how it might look once these renovations are completed. It's certainly a very different look there and a lot more in keeping with some of the modern NFL stadiums we see now, as opposed to what Jacksonville kind of has been, which is a very antiquated, sort of out-of-date stadium that the Jaguars have played in. You've said before you kind of like a little bit of a rotational thing for the Georgia-Florida game. How would you feel about playing the cocktail party in Jacksonville in such a new-look stadium, and maybe even the idea of having a roof over your head while you played it? That would certainly take some getting used to there. What do you make of the new look for that Jacksonville stadium there?
I think it was much needed. I think it was time to upgrade their stadium. I think the college program just spends so much money to upgrade it each year, and that has to do with recruiting, trying to keep up with the Joneses. So for Jacksonville to keep this game there, they had to do something to please both sides. And the upgrade, and if it's a roof, we know that weather is never going to be an issue for us. It's raining, so they had to do something. So I like the upgrades that they're doing.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I'm sure, it's one of those things where, there are a lot of people who have sort of different feelings about this. There's some people that want to see this become a home and home. You've talked about wanting to see that Georgia-Florida game become maybe more of a rotational type thing. We've heard other people echo that in the past. Ultimately, what you find out is this game has just proven to be very important to Jacksonville, and as they think about a bigger stadium, I'm guessing in the future they may also think about a lot more money coming the way of both Georgia and Florida for playing that game there. And at one point in time, I thought, hey, we're about to see the end of this, that they're about to stop playing in Jacksonville and start playing home and home. But just given the investment they seem willing to be made into that stadium and the investment to maybe keep Georgia, Florida playing in that stadium each and every year, I'm starting to think that the future of the cocktail party is actually a little longer than I once maybe thought. Do you get the same sense that, hey, this game may actually be sticking around there for a little while?
Well, the old adage is you got to spend money to make money. So I think Jacksonville really recognized the importance of this game for their city. So they really have to go out and do the necessary upgrades to the city, to the facilities to keep this game there. I mean, I would definitely love to see 92,000, whatever the capacity is at Sanford Stadium now, and over 90 in Gainesville. I would love to see how that would shake up. But, this is the world's largest cocktail party. Everyone knows how I feel about it. I would love to see a home and home and in Jacksonville. So let's just see how it plays out. But like you said, if they're doing these upgrades, the game is probably going to stay in Jacksonville.
We have seen some social media activity as of late from Dylan Raiola, the five-star quarterback, number one recruit, obviously a Georgia commit, and he's been out there pushing for other guys to join him at UGA and been very open about doing that. Terrence, how important do you think it is for a quarterback like this to be a key leader for a recruiting class, to be that guy that's out there fanning the flames, being the biggest cheerleader for the program, and really pushing guys to join him? I think fans kind of like this kind of stuff because it's just sort of fun. Oftentimes maybe it doesn't lead to the kind of commits and signings that you maybe hope that it does. But how important do you think that is, the fact that Dylan Raiola is not only a very talented player, but he's also kind of really put himself out in the front as, I would say, the unquestioned leader of this class right now?
Yes, the quarterback position comes with responsibility that, like it or love it, it is what it is. And when you have a quarterback that is out, reaching out to all the guys, future teammates, he's making a connection with these guys on and off the field. Only thing you could do is respect that. A lot of guys going to go in and they're going to this is my guy. They love being able to play with this guy. They'll run through a brick wall for this guy. They'll do anything to make a play for this guy because he's instilling confidence in everyone in leadership. So it's very important for your quarterback to be out in front, because at the end of the day, you have to have a quarterback to win. I don't care what level you on. You have to have a talented quarterback to win, and he's a very talented guy. Now, what does his leadership entail? And we've seen his leadership so far through social media.
Yeah, no doubt about that. He's certainly shown that off to us here. One of the things we talked about yesterday a little bit is the fact that if you look at Georgia in comparison to Ohio State and Alabama, while Georgia is clearly an elite recruiting program, more than three-quarters of the players in this roster were former 4- and 5-star recruits coming out of high school, that it does seem like that Georgia has been willing to trust the lesser-known recruit a little bit more than some of these other programs have, and that's worked out really well. Obviously, Ladd McConkey is an example of that. That's a guy that you certainly know very well, Terrence. You've touted him for quite some time. So my question is, as a guy who kind of understands this both as a player and a coach, how is it that Georgia does this? In other words, let's take Ladd McConkey as an example. That's a guy we talked about yesterday. This is a guy that you told us before he took his first snap at Georgia that you thought he'd be a good player. So when a guy like this goes on to be good at Georgia, or guys like him, Javon Bullard's a little bit like that, others too, is this Georgia seeing a player in high school that they realized was better than the rest of the country knew about? Or is this Georgia somehow developing these players better once they're on campus? How do you account for the fact that on a roster like Georgia's, where so many of the players are elite recruits, some of the guys who were not elite recruits end up being some of the very best players in a way that's kind of uncommon in comparison to the Alabamas, the Ohio States, and programs like that?
I think a lot of times you just got to trust your gut, your instincts, and trust your eyes. We go out and try to overthink this thing a lot. Let's just take Ladd, for example. He was probably 160 pounds once they saw him, but he had a lot of the traits that they was looking for. He was very quick, straight line fast, and he was tough. You just could see that him playing in high school, that he was a tough football player, and that translates. Javon Bullard is one of those middle Georgia unknown football players from Baldwin County. They saw just a tough, hard-nosed football player, and sometimes, he does not come into 6 feet to 6'2" range. He comes in a small package that you see that Ladd McConkey and Javon Bullard had. So I just think that the Georgia fans or the college football fans, let's go out and just watch these kids film before we make a judgment on them, because recruiting services does not have them ranked as a 4 or 5-star. There are some guys that are late bloomers that you get an eval on, you put it in your analytics, and just see what it say. But at the end of the day, I go and watch the film for myself, and I can see, is he stiff in the hips? Ladd McConkey was not stiff in the hips. Does he catch the football very well? He caught the football well. Only thing that Ladd needed was just an understanding of how to play the wide receiver position. Now, that comes with development, and Georgia has done a great job developing those unknown guys.
So it's kind of funny to me that we're talking about McConkey here, but we could also say something similar about A.D. Mitchell. Now, A.D.'s not here anymore, but A.D., from the word go, was a better player than his recruiting ranking would have suggested there as well. And, LSU's had big-time receivers that weren't necessarily elite recruits before. They've had a lot that were elite recruits, but they've had big-time guys that weren't. Ohio State, for as many 5-star guys as they had, Chris Olave wasn't a big-time recruit. So, there are occasionally these great receivers who were not necessarily great recruits. What that leads me to is, do you think the wide receiver position, the position obviously that you played and you're so close to still right now, do you think it's more difficult to evaluate wide receivers than it is to evaluate players at other positions?
I wouldn't say so. There are some guys that you just know. A.J. Green you just knew he was going to be special. And those guys is easy. But then, on the other hand, there are some guys that you just thought was going to be better than they turn out to be. So on one hand, the special ones is easy to determine. But I tend to agree with you now that it is kind of hard to know how a receiver is going to pan out, because you don't know how well he learns. You don't know how tough he is. You don't know the heart of a kid. So it is kind of hard to determine, what a receiver is going to be. But, you just go back to LSU. Justin Jefferson. No one knew Justin Jefferson was going to turn out to be what he is today. I love A.D. Mitchell when he came out. I told you that. I loved him. So as a receiver, I have an eye for these guys because I played receiver and I know what I'm looking for. So I love evaluating talent. I love watching tape and seeing who I think can or can't play. But I just think for the untrained eye, it's kind of difficult to see what I see.
I want to ask you about this. We're going to talk about this more in a minute once we kind of transition to our SEC through. But there's a story out there right now that the EA Sports college football video game is on its way back. And obviously post Ed O'Bannon lawsuit, now players, also in the NIL age, get a chance to kind of cash in on this in a way they didn't before. But apparently the payout, not exactly what some players were hoping for, only about $500 per player, stretch all across college football. And there's a organization out there kind of urging a boycott to basically kind of, opt out of the video game because the payment of $500 they believe is not nearly enough. What do you think about this, Terrence, as a player here that, obviously the chance to cash in is there, but the truth is once you sort of spread this across the entire country, there's not necessarily, quite as much money to maybe go around there. You think the players ought to be happy with the $500 and be thankful to be in the video game, or do you think they ought to opt out and hold out and hope for a little bit more?
No, you hold out. I was in this video game and didn't receive a dime. Brock Bowers will bring more attention to this video game than a lot of college players. So he deserves way more than $500. He's going to make EA Sports and the other top guys in the country way more money than $500. So, to me, it could be a sliding scale. I'm sorry if that's kind of, Brock Bowers needs more than someone else who we don't know. That's just the way it should be. But $500 for Brock Bowers and $500 for a guy who haven't played a snap in college football just doesn't seem right to me. But to me, it's kind of a slap in the face for you offer every college football player $500 when clearly each college football player value is not the same. So
I got to ask you this, I guess sort of a two-part question. First of all, what was it like to sort of see your image in a video game? Obviously, back then they weren't putting Terrence Edwards' name on there, but it was the number 8. We would have all known who it was. What was it like to sort of see your image on a video game screen? And I guess at the time, did you have any kind of thought of, hey, nobody paid me to do this? What were your thought processes back then when you kind of saw yourself rendered on an image like that?
I think the first thing that every player did is go see how fast they had you, all the attributes. I think like that's the first thing that you go do is go find your attributes and see what they have you. I'm like, oh, they got me rated too slow or whatever. So, but then you play with yourself. It was fun going out playing with myself on a video game or the character who's supposed to be me.
Did you make yourself an option quarterback? Hey, did you make yourself into an option quarterback?
I put myself at quarterback to go run some plays. Jim Dunn did that in the Oahu Bowl, and it got me MVP, so why not go and do it on a video game?
Listen, I like it. I like it, Terrence. That's good stuff for sure. Hey, we appreciate you being here, and obviously we talked about your great work that you're doing right now this time of year, getting those guys ready to have their own image in a EA Sports video game one day. Getting better right now is how you get that done. How can folks get in touch and get to know more about that Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy to be able to do that?
Well, right now, since summer practice is afoot,
okay.
I personally don't want to burn kids out. I don't want them to go to their high school practice, then come to me later. That'll be selfish of me. But I am putting together a middle school.
Nice.
So any middle schoolers out there looking to get better at that craft, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. So I'm looking for some middle schoolers now.
I like it, Terrence. That sounds like good stuff. Never too soon to start trying to get better at your craft, and obviously Terrence helps you do that. That's why we love talking to him on the program each and every week. Terrence, have a great week. We'll look forward to catching up with you here very soon, and we'll talk to you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp soon as well.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I want to get into more of what Terrence was talking about right there because I think that's kind of fun, kind of interesting. We'll do that here in a moment. Let me remind you prior to that, cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me tell you something. There are rumors out there. I cannot confirm them. There are rumors, though, rumblings afoot about the DawgNation cruise in 2024. Will there be one? Will it be bigger and better than ever before? People are saying. So what will be true about that, we'll tell you when we can. But for now, it's time for you to think about your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Many of you know I've got a little weekend cruise coming up here before the summer is done. I'm very excited about that. It's one of those things, get a chance to share that with my family. My brother and his kids, his wife are going. My mom's going to be a part of that. And it's just one of those things of, hey, you bring the whole family together, you have a great time, create some great memories. Our kids are super excited about it. I always know we're kind of getting close on that. Last night we're kind of sitting around watching some YouTube videos together, kind of looking at some of the fun stuff on the ship that we're going to be on and some of the excitement related to that. I just love that anticipation, getting ready for it. And my kids now, they had a chance to take their first Royal Caribbean cruise back in February, so they're experts. Now they know all about the ships and all about the things to do, and so they're kind of making their own plans, what they want to do while they're on board, and I just love all of that. So I hope you'll make your own plans, and I hope you'll use Jessica Slater as a great travel agent to help you with that. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She can help you get the most out of your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation experience, because there are a lot of variables. Which port do you want to sail out of? We heard from a Georgia fan the other day who said, hey, Tampa's closer for me, so I'm going to be going on a Royal Caribbean cruise out of Tampa. For many of you, it's Port Canaveral, because if you live in the Atlanta area, that's the shortest drive. Just past Orlando, you're right there at Port Canaveral, and you're ready to have a great time. And, for the others, it might be a Miami or a Fort Lauderdale or something like that, but also it's where you want to go. Some folks this time of year think about going on the Alaskan cruise. That's something I haven't done before, but I hope to do at some point in time. I've kind of all been about the Caribbean so far. But whichever choice, whichever option you want to take advantage of, Royal Caribbean's got you covered. So Jessica Slater can help you out with all of that. And hopefully we'll see you maybe on a DawgNation cruise here again at some point in time there as well. And we'll tell you more about that when we get a chance to do so. All right, so for now, let's go cruise around the SEC. And let me pick up with where I was just talking with Terrence Edwards there a moment ago. So EA Sports is bringing back the college video game, the football video game. A lot of folks are excited about that. And Sportico is kind of reporting here that the cash pool for athletes kind of cash in on the new video game is going to be about $5 million, which would pay out about $500 per player. $500 per player. There's also no royalties. This is Sportico, kind of a sports business-themed website reporting that. And there is an outfit out there, an organization out there called the College Football Players Association that's hoping to represent some players and hoping to kind of sort of rally the troops around players. And they're trying to organize a boycott, basically encouraging players to opt out on this as a way of getting more per player from EA Sports on the video game. Now, I thought it was very interesting to see some folks sort of step up and speak about this. For instance, there's a guy named Shannon Terry who runs a website called On3. Shannon's probably about as pro-NIL as anybody can be. And Shannon's public statement on this was that he thinks that 99.9% of the players that are out there ought to be happy with the $500. There's really only a couple of players out there. Terrence mentioned Brock Bowers a moment ago. Maybe that would be true for Bowers. I think other folks kind of mentioned more along the lines of quarterbacks like the Caleb Williams or perhaps a Drake May. There's really only a small handful of players that would really move the needle on a game like this to say we actually drive sales, that for most college football players, they're not going to contribute to more sales overall for the video game. What people really want is the college teams, and the generic names or no names whatsoever is enough for the average fan who enjoys playing this video game. I think I probably kind of a line up in that camp myself there on this. I don't mean to be harsh to the players themselves. Clearly, college football has been unmasked as a business, and so therefore players want to get their own stake into the business there as well. We certainly understand that. But there's going to be some harsh realities that get confronted as players pursue their own business pursuits here, which is when it comes to college athletics, the name on the front of the jersey, so to speak, is just worth more than the name on the back of the jersey. This is why we've never really seen a league pop up that takes talent that could play college football and does some sort of USFL or XFL style league, taking advantage of those players, because frankly it's just easier to market a player when he's playing for Georgia football or Duke basketball or something else kind of at that NCAA level. There is just a cachet and a prestige that comes with playing college athletics that does not exist playing for somewhere else. And that if you released the NCAA video game similar to the way it was in the past, with no player names on it whatsoever, or kind of one of these, sort of franchise type deals where eventually you've sort of just got made up players and things like that, for the average college fan, that's probably enough. And for the average college player, listen, I mean, you're going to hear about a few players who want more than the $500. The truth is, a good number of players have said in the past they just wanted the video game to come back. They didn't care if they got paid for it or not. That's probably a little bit more of a prevailing, line of thought than maybe a lot of folks kind of realize here on this. But in some respects, this is a little bit of a precursor to what the future of college athletics could look like there as well, where we think there is certainly the potential for movement in the direction of one day players being classified as employees. And once that happens, it creates a very interesting scenario for a lot of these players where, hey, do you want collective rights leading to collective payments, or do you want individual marketing opportunities, individual compensation opportunities? Because you hear about like Pareto's law and things like that, 80-20 principle, that 20% of the people generate about 80% of the value for any organization. If anything, the numbers are maybe even more skewed in the direction of 90-10 or 95-5, something along those lines. There's just going to be excellence in any field. And in college football, it's much the same way, that a small number of football players have value that is exponentially greater than the average college football player. So what kind of compensation model does the sport pursue in the future? If we really are going to classify these athletes one day as employees, if that's the way they're going to be thought of, then how are they going to be paid? Are they going to be paid across the board in sort of stipend form, or are they going to be paid individually based on their individual worth? And I think that leads to a very interesting debate and discussion there in the future. Because, listen, no matter how large the overall pool of money that exists around college football, and it is a very large pool, no matter how large it is, you can still only spend that money one time. You can spend it to give the best players the money you think they're worth, but that just leads to less money for the average players. And we've always contended that while we're not anti-NIL or anything like that, we've always contended, though, that the current deal where you get a free scholarship and you get the sort of, fringe benefits that go along with playing college football, that the average college football player actually has a pretty good deal in the current deal that exists around college football. And that when you move to the sort of the compensation, true pay-for-play model, true employee model, that's only going to probably benefit a small number of players in a huge way. And that in most cases, the average college football player is probably getting a pretty good deal based on his individual worth here right now. That's just the way I think that this sport's currently set up. It's probably a better deal than it's been given credit for. So as you kind of move towards some of this kind of stuff in the future, how much is the EA Sports debate right now of $500? I thought it'd be getting more than this. How much is this a precursor of what's to come, where players have to decide? Do you want collective rights and therefore kind of collective payments? Equal payments across the group, or do you want to kind of stand out individually and negotiate individually for what you feel like you're worth, much the same way the professional sports kind of do right now? I think it'll be interesting to see where all this is heading. One more quick SEC through story here for a moment. Saw where Greg McElroy, the former Alabama quarterback, obviously a radio host as well, there, ESPN analyst of course too, but radio host in Birmingham, WJOX. Our friends at Saturday Down South wrote a story about this, that he was on the radio the other day kind of touting for Alabama this upcoming season. And McElroy said something that I thought was kind of interesting, that he says he actually likes this version of Alabama this year better than the Alabama team a year ago. And I remember at the time McElroy sort of expressed some concern about the transfer players that Alabama was bringing in, echoing what we had said on this show. We proved to be right on that. McElroy was, I guess, too. But what McElroy had kind of said that kind of got my attention is he actually feels like this team for Alabama this year is going to be a little bit more like the early Nick Saban teams, where they do lean on running the football a little bit more, and they do kind of go away from their previous identity of kind of being a quarterback-driven team. Now, we might somewhat, I guess, sarcastically say, hey, that might be driven by necessity, because right now it doesn't really appear that Alabama on its roster has a obviously very good quarterback. They may have to hope to run the football better. That may be what they have to try to do, because they just may not be quite nearly as good at the quarterback position they've been in the past. Maybe that's the case, but it is interesting to hear a guy like McElroy, who played at Alabama and obviously knows the landscape there in Tuscaloosa, suggesting that the recipe for success for Alabama this year is kind of being a little bit more reminiscent of early Alabama teams. Now, what McElroy did not say, but maybe you've already kind of concluded is that they're trying to be more like the old Alabama. Then what actually may also be true is they're actually trying to be a little bit more like the current version of Georgia, which has never been as quarterback-driven as Alabama was. But the truth is, you had Bryce Young as your starting quarterback for 2 years. You never won a national championship. That style of play did not turn out to be as productive for success for Nick Saban as maybe he assumed that it would be. And now maybe he's trying to go back, old dog, trying to go back to some of his old tricks. We will see how much that works out. But Greg McElroy, interesting words there, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up today's show, have to give you a little bit of an apology. Yesterday, apparently we missed a holiday, and we try not to miss those holidays. Now, listen, we try also to be here on most holidays. It is very rare for us to have a show we don't a day we don't do a show. Some holidays we do take off, Christmas Day, Thanksgiving Day, stuff like that. But we try to make sure that we recognize all holidays when they take place. Yesterday, apparently, we missed one, and that's the subject of our golden shoe today, because yesterday was June 7th, or 6-7 on the calendar, and 6-7 on the calendar will apparently be remembered as National Gator Day in honor of the Florida Gators going 6-7 last year. Evil Coach put that on Twitter. Happy 6-7 National Gator Day after the 6-7 season a year ago. Georgia on Tap, who's always so funny online, shared that with me. So we'll give Georgia on Tap a golden shoe for sharing with me. Evil Coach for pointing out the holiday, and those lousy stinking Gators for a losing season a year ago. Plenty of laughs and golden shoes to go around on all of that. By the way, speaking of the lousy stinking Gators, how about 142 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, old stadium for now, the brand new Space Age Stadium, that's a few years away, but for now in the old stadium, Georgia will do what it always does, which is beat up on Florida. 142 days from now, that is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let's get your comments here. I'm going to go to DawgNation.com first. We'll bounce through the comment section. We'll probably get ready to roll out of here on Friday, on a Thursday here in a little bit. DT says Brock Bowers is such a team guy. I bet he is fine with the $500 for everyone. I'm guessing that's probably the case. I love Brock Bowers. I think that Brock Bowers is an amazing player and he deserves every NIL dollar that he can get. I would probably disagree with my good friend Terrence Edwards a little bit from the standpoint that Bowers' presence in the game drives a whole lot in the way of sales. I believe that Georgia football's presence in the game drives tremendously when it comes to that. I don't know that Brock Bowers individually is moving the needle that much. I also don't think that Drake May individually is moving the needle that much. Maybe Caleb Williams because he plays in L.A. and he's the Heisman quarterback. Maybe he has some individual value there. Maybe that's the case. But ultimately, that's just not how college football typically is. Like every so often, there's a Reggie Bush in this sport, or there's a Tim Tebow in this sport, or there's a, I don't even know who, Peyton Manning when he played at Tennessee. Every so often, there's a college football player that truly rises to the level of being a celebrity. That actually just doesn't happen all that much. It just doesn't. There are players who are very famous to us because we're college football obsessives. But you think about the sort of casual sort of drive-by fan that watches ESPN. I always use stuff like this as a guide. Like if you watch the Scream Shouting Fest in the mid-morning, the Stephen A. Smiths, the Skip Baylesses, like how many college football players do they even know by name? I would suggest not very many. Those sort of very, very surface-level, mainstream-type shows, there aren't very many individual player names that ever get mentioned. For that matter, the Paul Feinbaum show is the same way. Like how many Feinbaum callers do you think that know Brock Bowers by name? Probably fewer than you probably realize. Now, a show like this is different. Like a lot of y'all know half the rosters for half the SEC. Y'all are a little bit different than the sort of typical kind of, just sort of surface level fan that exists for a lot of these other national type shows. By the way, time to get started. I should have mentioned this already. Thank you very much, Time, for bringing this up. The Iron Sheik did pass away yesterday. A big part of my childhood in the case of the Iron Sheik. Two things that I kind of think about the Iron Sheik. I used to always think that the camel clutch, his finishing maneuver, I used to always think that seemed like it would hurt so bad. And then one day my grandfather, we were wrestling around, and he actually put me in a camel clutch, and it did hurt. I always remember that. He felt so bad about that. But I always remember that. The other thing is about the Iron Sheik. He was former WWF champion. That was the person that Hogan beat to start his long run as champion in the 80s. But the Iron Sheik had beat Bob Backlund for the championship. This is before I was alive, I think. Not alive. Before I was old enough to kind of pay attention. I don't have any living memory of this. But the Iron Sheik beat Bob Backlund for the championship, and he used the camel clutch to do so. And the person that was in Backlund's corner threw in the towel to give Iron Sheik the win. There's a rumor that's out there, and I don't know if this is true, that a lot of you are familiar with the Montreal screw job where Bret Hart supposedly did not know going into the ring he was going to lose to Shawn Michaels. This is a real story that they tricked him into losing the match when he didn't know he was going to lose it. It's a famous story. A lot of you are aware of that. There's also a rumor out there that Backlund did not know. Backlund had been champion for 8 years. That he did not know he was going to lose to the Iron Sheik that day. That was kind of a precursor to the Montreal screw job. I have no idea if that's true. No idea. It's a very interesting kind of rabbit hole to kind of go into. So that's the other thing that kind of comes up with the Iron Sheik is there are some people who say that his championship win over Backlund was a precursor to the Montreal screw job. So yeah. Time to get started also has an idea for Jeff to start doing some of his own predictions. Yeah, sometimes it's tough to wrangle a prediction on Jeff. Sometimes that's the case. DT says, to go back to the point we made about Brock Bowers, is that Carter Nelson said that he and his family didn't know Brock Bowers until the national championship. That was in Jeff's story about Nelson at DawgNation.com. And he's an elite tight end. Yeah, that's just kind of an example of that, is that to most of us, every college football player is pretty famous, but even to future college football players, not everybody is super famous. DT is mocking me for doing some wrestling talk, but we didn't do that much, DT. Every now and then we have to show a little humanity, a little personality. I'll put our show's ability to kind of keep it between the banks and stay on topic as much as anything, but every now and then we have to show a little bit of personality. Let's see what else is going on. Alan Hampton gives us a bold prediction here. No 1,000-yard receiver, but 4 will be close. Also, number 2 and number 22 will combine for 1,800 yards for dynamic offense. I like the idea of that. That sounds pretty good to me. James Richard says, how do you not know Brock Bowers? But this is the thing, though. It's like it's sort of hard to put yourself in the position of like one of these surface-level fans who gets their sports information from Paul Feinbaum or Stephen A. Smith. Like the kind of person that tunes into a show like this is just very different than the kind of person that tunes into a show like that. Andrew Hughes says, where should we erect the Smart statue? Hopefully close to the stadium. And that's always been the issue with the Vince Dooley statue, is it's so far away from the stadium. And, we kind of understand some of the political stuff that was going on there at the time, whether you're in favor of it or not. Obviously, a lot of folks were not. You certainly understand, the politics that influenced all of that. But hopefully Kirby Smart gets a statue kind of right there, front and center in the stadium. Braided Past Management, interesting prediction that Lawson Lucky is better than Oscar Delp right now. Yeah, I feel like that people have kind of sold stock on Delp a little too quickly. I do. I think that Lawson Lucky can obviously be very good, but if people are selling low on Delp right now, I feel like I'm scarfing that. I feel like I'm scarfing it up. I really do. I have a sneaking suspicion that Georgia's going to be in 2 tight end sets, a little bit more than some folks think they will be. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Delp's going to be on the field a pretty good bit. Could be wrong. Could be I turn out wrong about that. And obviously I think that Lawson Lucky is a big-time prospect. I truly do. I sort of feel like there's some selling low on Delp right now that I would kind of stand in the way of. William Perry says I should stay focused. Says don't make the personality about a fake sport. This isn't WrestleMania Nation. Yeah, but in fairness, somebody brought it up to me. So what I typically do around here is I just sort of respond to whatever the commenters are talking about. Ryan Harris says that Vince Dooley needs to be in the middle. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where there is very obviously a story about the statues that nobody's telling. I mean, there just is. And at a certain point in time, it becomes conspicuous in its absence. It just does. It just does. And I have my suspicions about certain things, not necessarily my place to say, but I mean, it's beyond weird that Georgia is a program like this that loves the sport as much as it does, a program like this that's really taken such great steps to improve the overall stadium aesthetic. The fact that it has not also added statues as a way to kind of celebrate some of the great players or great figures around the sport in a more prominent way, as I said before, that is conspicuous in its absence. Fred Gunn says, as deep as our tight ends are, why wouldn't you have 2 or even 3 on the field? Well, the thought here is, Fred, is that Georgia has something right now that it probably has not had before, which is a slot receiver like Dominic Lovett. That this guy had nearly 900 yards receiving a year ago. That Lovett is one of the most prolific returning receivers in the entire SEC. Now he plays for Georgia. So just basic arithmetic here. If you've got the slot receiver in the game, you can't have the tight end of the game, the second tight end of the game. That you're either going to play 3 receivers, 1 tight end, or you're going to play 2 receivers, 2 tight ends. That if you put Delp in the game, you're taking Lovett out for the most part. And if you put Lovett in the game, you're taking Delp or Lawson Lucky or somebody like that out of the game there as well. That's kind of the game there. That it's either the slot receiver in the game or it's the second tight end of the game. And sometimes, last year obviously you put Darnell in the game and Brock kind of became the slot receiver. So the personnel for Georgia is a little bit different this year. Georgia probably has the best slot receiver in the entire SEC in the person of Dominic Lovett. So how you use all these guys, that could lead to, a little bit different look for Georgia, more so than any kind of dissatisfaction with what Georgia has at the tight end spot. Let's see what else. Reggie Fly, I don't quite know what to do with that one. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says that Kirby's replaced Dooley. Yeah, I don't think that's the way I would use that. I understand what you mean by that, but I don't think that Kirby Smart's success makes Vince Dooley's success any less significant. I don't think that's the case. Vince Dooley won 201 games at Georgia, stayed here for 25 years, 6 SEC championships. Obviously, Kirby's surpassed Coach Dooley in the number of national championships. But I don't think this is one of those things where, there's only room for one at the top necessarily. Now, if you want to force the debate of, well, is Kirby Smart now a better coach than Vince Dooley? I might say that he is. Short term, I think, though, that as Kirby's career goes on, I think a little bit like the way that Tiger Woods, I think, put a better spotlight on Jack Nicklaus, because sometimes you see this, and some of y'all criticize me when I talk about wrestling, now you're going to criticize me talking about golf. But if you see the emergence of Tiger Woods when it first happened, won the Masters in 97, won the Tiger Slam in 2000, at that point in time, it seemed like, oh, he's just going to obliterate every record, and he's going to clearly be viewed as the greatest golfer of all time. But here we are all these years later, and he still has not surpassed and is seemingly not going to surpass Jack Nicklaus' record for most major championships. That as great as Tiger Woods was, what he also did was help us understand better how great Jack Nicklaus used to be, especially for those of us who weren't really alive to experience the Nicklaus era. Tiger Woods' performance made us understand better just how good Jack Nicklaus really was. And I think there's a degree to which that Kirby Smart's going to do the same thing with Vince Dooley. Because even if Kirby Smart wins 100 national championships or many more national championships, I still think winning 201 games, 25 years, 6 SEC championships, I still think as Kirby Smart kind of approaches some of those numbers, we'll look back and realize, oh gosh, Vince Dooley had to be really good for a long period of time to be able to do that. That as Kirby, in some respects, is on his way to surpassing Coach Dooley, in other ways, as he approaches some of these other marks, we may realize, wow, Vince Dooley really did set a very high standard at UGA. So, I think when the Kirby Smart career is done, it certainly seems likely that he'll be unquestioned as the best coach in Georgia football history. I think that's probably true. But if it's possible, I also believe that along the way towards doing that, he'll actually raise the appreciation that a lot of us have for Vince Dooley, I believe, if that makes sense. Colby Strotter says, what tailgate atmosphere are you most looking forward to? He says, I'm thinking either SC or Missouri. So I'll tell you this. I had a chance to go to Missouri for the first time this past year, and I found that to be a very, very enjoyable road trip. I'd never been before for just a myriad weird reasons, just kind of a weird confluence of things that sort of led me to never have been to Missouri, but I did go there. And I'll tell you, for the Georgia fan who kind of like looks for that big road trip to take every year, now some of y'all go to every road game, but others of you sort of look for that one road trip to take every year. The next time Missouri is on Georgia's schedule as a road game, I'm not sure when it will be, but the next time, because we're obviously about to change the schedules here pretty profoundly, but the next time that it is, I would encourage you to take the trip. Columbia itself is kind of a fun town, really good restaurants. Fall weather there can be really nice. The Friday night before the game, we went to the St. Louis Cardinals game. So basically what you can do is you can either go into Kansas City and then go over to Columbia, or you can go into St. Louis and go over to Columbia. You can kind of do either one. And we chose to do St. Louis, go to the Cardinals game there at Busch Stadium. That was a really fun experience, about a 2-hour drive over to Columbia after that. And I really enjoyed it. And it's obviously long, and it's kind of expensive, of course. But for those of you who kind of think that one road trip to take every year, I would not discount Columbia as a road trip worth taking. You have to fly there probably. It's certainly easier to fly. Got to fly there, but a really fun road trip. And I'll tell you, I've always sort of felt like that the South Carolina atmosphere for a football game, I think they do a good job. And I know the rooster crowing gets annoying, and the sandstorm gets annoying. I kind of realized that a lot of that kind of gets pretty tiresome to a lot of folks. But this is a fan base that over the years has chosen to really be supportive of its team, even when they didn't necessarily have a lot to cheer for. And so I got some respect for that. And I know not everybody likes to hear me say that, but I do kind of have some respect for that. All right, let's see. Andrew Hughes says, we take for granted everything we have now, but Dooley did it without any of the modern amenities for real grown man football. Yeah, there's also something to be said for being kind of a founding father, so to speak. It's like there's something to be said for ushering in an era of Georgia football. Coach Dooley wasn't the first successful coach for this program, but he did sort of bring Georgia football in kind of the modern age. I think that's true. Jonathan Aaron says, any plans on bringing back the Gator Hater Updater? That's what we used to do, kind of how long it had been. We've done a couple versions of this, how long it had been since Florida beaten Georgia, or how long it had been since Florida won a national championship. I think we sort of settled on just doing the Gator Hater Countdown because people seem to just sort of like that the best of all. And it's... To be honest, it sort of got to be a lot of stuff at the end of the show between the Golden Shoe, the Gator Hater Updater, and then doing the Gator Hater Countdown. That got to be kind of a lot. So we decided to sort of pare that down a little bit. But thank you for asking. I'm glad. Foster Moss says, what was more annoying, that third down music at Missouri or that rooster at USC? So that, was it Timmy Trumpet? Is that the guy who does the Narcos thing? For a while, that song was everywhere. And, our sort of rec league baseball team, a lot of times the parents like to do like the walk-up music on the speaker kind of just from the stands. And so at the same time we were doing our fall league season, my son was using that same song as his walk-up song. That song was just everywhere. Like, obviously the big part of the Major League Baseball season. I think Alabama had done something with it. Missouri was doing it on third down every single time. I'm always kind of allergic to these songs that are just sort of everywhere all at once. And so I definitely kind of got, it's a catchy tune, of course. But I was kind of annoyed by that music there at Missouri because, I've told the story before. Like, the Missouri fans could not have been nicer. They were so welcoming and gracious. They were, frankly, scared of Georgia. And so they were, like, rolling out the red carpet. They were just sort of putting their, go to this restaurant and do this, and here you want some of this. And, like, they could not have been nicer. And then the moment that Georgia had, a couple of turnovers, was that what kind of got it all started? Those fans turned just like that. And all of a sudden, they became believers. And I swear the stadium got more and more full as the game went on. At least it felt that way. And all of a sudden, now they're making a bunch of noise, and they're trying to make this into a house of horrors. And it was like I'd never quite seen, a mood change more than that, where, they kind of viewed themselves in the position of party hosts and like hospitality committee, prior to the game, because they had literally zero expectations for how it would turn out. Then the moment Georgia was kind of, playing around to begin the game, all of a sudden now the Missouri fans start showing their teeth a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a disaster. Baggins and Friend says, what song? We're talking about that Timmy Trumpet's Narcos thing with the trumpet. I think like the Mets made it popular first, which is enough reason to dislike it alone, and then it was just everywhere for a little while. Jeremy Harbin says, would love to have heard Larry Munson call someone. Yeah, listen, I miss Larry Munson all the time. I do. Let's see what else. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, I think the Rocky Top song is terrible and very annoying. It's just amazing how many times they play it. And that's the thing, is like, they just play it a gazillion times. It's almost like that's not the only song the band plays, but it certainly feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment, see what they're talking about over here. And I would play, the Timmy Trumpet thing on my phone and put it on the microphone, but, Big Tech always dings as we ever play commercial music, so we try to stay away from that. Alan Verbanchik says, what would happen, the Kirby teams versus the SOS, he means the Steve Spurrier teams of the 90s. Yeah, it'd be fun. I mean, I hope that one day we have if, like, you got these, new Apple glasses now, and you got, like, the metaverse stuff. I feel like at some point in time we'll have technology that gives us a chance to make these dream matchups in some sort of digital space somewhere. I think that any of the previous era teams would have a hard time holding up to the level of depth that exists right now. College football, we talked about efficiency a little earlier. College football has just gotten more efficient. Steve Spurrier was not a great recruiter. Obviously, he had a lot of top-end talent on those teams, but Spurrier was not going out of his way to fill every position on the roster the way that a coach like Kirby Smart is right now. And that's not a knock on Spurrier. Just back then, people didn't fully appreciate the importance of having the entirety of your 85-man roster, or whatever the roster size was, the entirety of your roster be filled with potentially capable contributing players. They just didn't understand that back then. And obviously that's more understood now. So, if you're going to make some sort of digitized version of Georgia 2022 versus Florida 1996 or 1995, whichever team you would say the very best Florida team was, if you're going to do some version of that, I do think you have to account for the fact that the best teams now are just deeper than the best teams back then. We measure talent better and we acquire talent better as a sport than we used to. Barry Watkins says the one he would love to have heard Larry Munson on was the end of the Ohio State game. Yeah, that would have been very good. It would have been. Let's see what else. Gerald Harmon, very funny. Very funny. Yeah, listen. Hey, keeping everybody happy at home is always a very important thing. Matt Rukavina making a joke. I don't quite get that. Is that a Lord of the Rings joke? Maybe it is. I don't quite get that. I'm not big into like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. I saw the original movies. I didn't really understand them all that well. So I've never really quite been big into all that. Bill Sanders says outside of the SEC, don't sleep on Tallahassee is a good tailgate spot. I've been to one Florida State game one time, and it was a good tailgate spot. It really was. I think what's weird about some of those stadiums that are one bowl, and Florida State's kind of like that, where what we would think of as kind of the upper level is actually just a longer version of the one level of the stadium, that the worst seats there are actually pretty bad, I would say. So if you're sitting, kind of towards the back of the stadium, I feel like you're farther away from the action than you might be in some other places, I think. But I was very glad to have gotten a chance to go to a game there. It's been 20-something years ago now that I was there, but I got a chance to go there, got a chance to see that. This was back when Florida State was very good, and yeah, I mean, I would say it's a good atmosphere. Georgia does have a home-and-home schedule with Florida State coming up in a few years. Hopefully those games will still be played. Obviously, there's no reason to think they won't be, but we saw the Oklahoma game canceled for this upcoming season. So, yeah, I think regional rivalries like that can be really fun because what you've kind of got in the future is there are a lot of Georgia fans who want to go, play more Big Ten teams or go out west and play USC. Georgia's going to play UCLA in a couple of years. They want to see that kind of stuff, and I like that too. It's one of those things, I guess we just sort of want everything. But while Georgia is expanding its SEC slate potentially and continuing to play some of these games outside the region, going into the Midwest or the far west to play some games, there is something to be said for that regional rivalry, home and home with Clemson, home and home with Florida State. I think stuff like that can be really fun, even though it's not quite as far away. But I'm looking forward to seeing Georgia play Florida State in a couple of years. And if Florida State continues on the trajectory that's on right now, the Seminoles might be pretty good then. Bill Sanders also mentioned the Grove in Oxford. I've never been there, but I'd like to go. And that's, I guess, part of what the new schedule for the SEC is going to provide, that you won't be going quite so long without visiting these places. The last time Georgia went to Ole Miss was in 2016. And so as opposed to rotating every 6 years around these spots, you may get a chance to rotate every 4 years, and so you'll just see them more frequently. Bo Bridges says, I got a chance to meet you at the Missouri game. Bo, that's awesome. I love that chance to meet and say hello to folks like you and talk to other people. That's my favorite thing about the games is that if it wasn't for those opportunities, I wouldn't get a chance to sort of say hello to folks like Bo. And I just love that opportunity. I really, really enjoy meeting Georgia fans and talking Georgia football with people who are kind enough to join us and be a part of our show. So, Bo, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Matt Rukavine also mentioned that Columbia, South Carolina is only a 3-hour drive from Athens, a perfect road trip for the fans. It really is. It's an easy drive. One of the things I have done, I don't know that I recommend this for everybody, but it works for my schedule. A lot of times if one of those games will be 3:30, I'll drive up there the day of the game, and then I'll drive home at the end, not spending the night. You have to be able to, obviously, that's not for everybody necessarily, but sometimes that works well for me, for sure. There you go. Matt Rukavina wants to come to a night game in Athens this year and may have to take a trip to Helen to entice her. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Get you folks back here in the Peach State. That'd be great. Rick Wallace, thank you for the kind words. He says, I'm truly a man of the people. Well, listen, I am very thankful for anybody who takes the time to say hello to me and obviously takes the time to watch our show. So I take that as a great, great privilege. So thank you very much. Jay Shipe says, any luck on unloading those worthless Auburn tickets that I bought up? I don't know about that, Jay. Let's see what else. Nature Gator saying that Florida State's chance this year kind of hinges on Jordan Travis, a quarterback. I'd say that's probably true. We talked yesterday about the fact that maybe surprising to some, they actually don't exceed the 50% threshold on Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio. It sort of suggests that maybe some of the playoff talk around them has maybe been overstated slightly a bit. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson brings up a really good point. He says, Greg McElroy wants to get back to old Alabama football, but McElroy forgets that old Alabama football also included Kirby Smart as defensive coordinator. Frank, that's a very good point. Jonathan Aaron says, other than Jimbo Fisher, who would I have on my Mount Rushmore of college coaches? Jonathan, that's not kind. That is very funny, though. Very funny. My Mount Rushmore, in all seriousness, that's a good question. I want to think about that a little bit more. I mean, obviously Nick Saban's on there. You got to say that. Like knee-jerk reaction, like one of the first names that comes to mind for me in addition to that, I'd almost want to put Bobby Bowden on there. And this is one of the things, like I don't want to say something that's obviously wrong. So I'm just kind of giving you knee-jerk on this. I have great respect for the fact that they were in the top 5 at the end of the season. Like all that stretch throughout the 90s, always a top 5 level team. you'd say, well, they didn't win enough national championships because ultimately they won in 93 and 99. That was it, right? But man, consistent winner year after year after year. Sort of want to put him on there. I guess you got to probably put Bear Bryant on there, right? I mean, some of those championships were invented, but he's still a great coach. That's interesting. Who else should obviously be on there? Nature Gator says, which team in the SEC has the best chance to get to Omaha, in my opinion? Well, the one I don't want it to be is still Tennessee. This is the one sport where, obviously I like being a Gator hater and joking around about stuff like that. But in baseball, I do enjoy rooting against Tony Vitello and the Vols more so than anybody else. I don't know, Nature. How do you think it's Florida? Are they the ones there? I don't know that I have a great answer for that necessarily. You think it's Florida? Obviously, they look pretty good in that in their regional. I did see some of that. Colby Strutter says, come down here and watch the Wintersville Classic. I'd love to do that. I really would. I'd love to do a Valdosta Lowndes game. I really, really would. I'd give anything if we got a chance to do more South Georgia games. It does make the college football Saturday trickier when you're coming from South Georgia to get there. I always wish we could do a South Georgia game in connection with the Georgia-Florida game. That's what I always wish we could do. It's not always easy to do that, but I'd love to do one of those before it's all said and done. I really would. Nature says that Florida have quite enough pitching right now. The one I was a little bit disappointed in, I guess they weren't necessarily favored, but Stanford really handled Texas A&M last week. I was a little bit surprised by that. And then obviously Vanderbilt, got knocked out of the regional after winning the SEC tournament. So there were a couple of surprising results last week. Foster Moss also mentioning Jimmy Johnson, Tom Osborne. If you're thinking about Mount Rushmore style coaches, you got to consider them for sure. Jimmy Johnson was a great college coach. He was. Quabna Fields asked a really good question. Says the one knock on – let me read this because this is a good point. Quabna says the one knock on Kirby I have is the removal of Fan Day. Any chance it's coming back? It used to be a birthday special for me and my cousin. So, Quabna, I know exactly where you're coming from on this because, like, when I was growing up, like, the sort of Fan Day, picture day type stuff was a big part of my summer getting ready for the start of the upcoming season. I think that Georgia football is just so much more popular now. I actually don't even really put this on Kirby quite as much, although Kirby is certainly, kind of, sort of ushered in a new era where Georgia doesn't really do anything like that anymore. It had basically been pared down to almost nothing, and then post-COVID, it hasn't really existed at all. So it sounds like that timing was always around your birthday, which is obviously really fun. Here's what I will tell you, is that one of the things about the new NIL era, which I think is just across the board a positive for fans, is the NIL autograph signing type things. Like there was one in Athens. I knew some folks that were, or I guess it was more like the Jefferson area. I knew some folks that were doing this a couple of weeks ago. A lot of Georgia players were there signing autographs. And typically speaking, those opportunities, provide more of an opportunity for true interaction than maybe Fan Day would have anyway. Now, that's not the same thing as Fan Day, and that's obviously a cost and maybe not free the way that Fan Day was, but it is a little bit more FaceTime than you otherwise might get. I've also seen a bunch of Georgia football players from time to time signing autographs at some of these baseball card shows and things like that go on. And you could walk right up to them and talk to them, and in most cases the line wasn't very long. You had a chance to kind of really interact with them. So I am like you. I wish there was a little bit more for Georgia fans to do that was free, a little bit more stuff that was kind of sanctioned. Like it sort of seems like now, and I'm not trying to be corny, but it just sort of seems like this is the case, that the kind of, stuff for everybody, stuff that's not $1 million and stuff that's not, super restrictive and exclusive, it just sort of seemed like that stuff has kind of disappeared. Like even professional sports sort of has more of that. Like the Braves do Fan Fest every year, and I think that's free. Even professional sports at times sort of seems like they have a little bit more for free than what Georgia football seems to be able to provide. And some of that's just due to the popularity of the program. It really is. But in the NIL era, these sort of meet and greet opportunities with players, and some of this, you even like do some of the Zoom interactions with them from time to time, is that it may not be quite as perfect of a replacement, but it is a pretty cool replacement, I think, that you can actually go directly to the players to interact with them a little bit more now. The picture day thing, long story short, I do believe that's probably gone away. Frank Patterson also mentioning Newt Rockne. Yeah, you probably have to sort of think about the distant past on something like that too. I think you're probably right. Quabna Field says, I didn't think about NIL, no more free autographs. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of true. But in most cases, it's still money, but, in most cases, if you're going to get a Georgia player's autograph, it's $25, something like that, which is not free. I'm not trying to say that's not expensive. I mean, everything, can be expensive, but, a lot of times, like the professional athlete autograph might be $200. So in most cases, the Georgia player, when they're signing autographs out in person, it is certainly a more affordable price than what sometimes I like baseball cards and stuff like that. So a lot of these baseball card shows, you see the autograph prices for some of the professional athletes. They can be very expensive from time to time. By comparison, the college football player, typically more affordable. And as I said before, when I've seen some of these Georgia players signing autographs, some of these baseball card shows and things like that, oftentimes the line to get up there is not very long. So if you did pay, let's say, your $25, whatever it is, you get your autograph, you probably also get a little bit more conversation time there than you otherwise might get there too. I'll also say this, and I'm not saying go stalk players. I'm not saying don't take this the wrong way. I'm sure Quabna wouldn't. But my kids, from time to time, have kind of run into Georgia players. Y'all, these players are so nice to my kids, or I'm assuming that's anybody's kids. They've both told me stories of like being in Athens without me, or being, in a game when I was, working or something like that. And I mean, it really is cool how nice these players, I think, are to the kids to come up and say hello to them. I just think that's really, really, really nice. I really appreciate that. Frederick Meredith says that he probably ended Fan Day, Kirby did, because he doesn't want too many pats in the back for the players. That may be true. I also think logistically it's just a nightmare. And, I have also kind of heard, because here's the thing. Like, let's say you have Fan Day, but if 8 million people come, you're not getting anything from that either, right? So it's like, Fan Day is kind of cool as long as there aren't 2 gazillion people that go there. It's sort of like Disney World in some respects. Like, Disney World's expensive, but if it was free, you wouldn't be able to go either, because the line to ride a ride would be 6 hours long. And so Fan Day kind of operates the same way. It's like, it'd be great if Georgia had a Fan Day, and it'd be awesome if it was free. But when it's free, everybody wants to go. And so therefore, you get up there, and I've heard some stories from like previous Fan Days where it's like you get in line for an autograph and you don't even really know what player you're going to be getting an autograph from, because by the time you get up there, the players have sort of shifted out and they've had to rotate around. That I just think logistically it's just a nightmare. It's just a nightmare. Like, there's no easy way to do it. I think they've tried to have it in the indoor practice facility. I think they tried to have it on the stadium. When I was a kid, it was just a couple of thousand people on the practice field. And as long as the crowd's not too big, it's just not that big of a deal. But when you get to some of these insane crowds, it just becomes a very hard thing to logistically manage. And so if I was in charge of the program, I wouldn't want to have it either, even though as a fan of the program, or as someone who speaks on behalf of fans on this show, I'm kind of sad that it went away. Some of this is just about logistics, sheer oppressive logistics. Nature Gator says that, by the way, Nature Gator plays the villain, fairly effortlessly. He says Acuna better watch out for a high and tight pitch from Verlander tonight. First of all, Acuna's been hit 8 million times, so I don't want to hear anything about Alonso getting hit last night. Like, there will be no tears shed on my part for the former lousy stinging Gator Pete Alonso getting hit last night. It was not intentional, first of all, but even if it was, I wouldn't care. But the point is, Acuna's been hit 8 million times, so the Braves should have retaliated on his behalf a long time ago anyway. So, if the Mets, disgracing themselves in defeat once again, if they throw Acuna tonight, then that just shows what they are as a team. Lost the series, losers on the way out the door. throwing in Acuna. I don't think they will, but if they do, that's that. DT also talking about, UGA is always at the picture day. It used to be there as well. You could get your picture taken with UGA, and that was always a very big deal. But the line, so when I was a kid, you go there for picture day, it was like the line for Coach Dooley, eventually it became Coach Goff, the line for UGA. The line for UGA was always as big as anything, and he would kind of like do his little paw on the picture. You could kind of post the picture. That was always really fun, for sure. Time to get started says, what music for the upcoming UGA night game? Yeah, I wonder if they'll kind of do something to kind of spruce up some of the fourth quarter stuff when the lights go red. Nobody made a big deal about this, but at one point in time they sort of played that one Kanye song when the fourth quarter started. And then Kanye kind of, I guess, had some issues. I'm not even really sure what it was that he did, but Kanye kind of had some issues, and so they stopped playing the Kanye song. And they haven't really replaced that with anything, so I wonder if we'll see a new fourth quarter song for Georgia here this year. Brer Double Dog says, I liked your comment about offensive personnel. Don't seem to recall Bobo doing a lot of window dressing under Rick's regime. I see a lot of viable options to use the flexibility that Ladd and Bowers could provide. He says their versatility leaves a lot of options. Yeah, one of the things I do hope to see, and I honestly don't remember this from the previous Bobo era very much, and don't really remember this from G-Day very much either. But I do think that pre-snap motion is valuable, right? I mean, I'm not a X's and O's guy. I don't pretend to be. Don't need to pretend to be. I do think that pre-snap motion stuff is valuable. Like, what do you do before the ball is snapped to put your players in a position to win? And I hope to see some of that. I feel like that was something that Todd Monken was very good at, and I hope to see more of that. From Bobo this year. I think you bring up a good point. DT says, I've got Little League pitchers enforcing unwritten rules. Listen, you put a Little League pitcher in the game, there's a chance he's going to hit somebody anyway. In a lot of ways, it takes more courage to step into the batter's box in a Little League game than it does at a higher level game. Because a lot of these Little League pitchers, and this is across the board, you got guys that are learning how to pitch, and while you're learning how to pitch, you don't know where the ball's going. So, obviously at that age, you're always trying to encourage players to not be afraid of the ball and things like that. But by the time you get to high school, for the most part, a high school pitcher kind of knows what he's doing with the baseball a little bit. He wouldn't be pitching if he didn't have a pretty good chance of making the strike zone. Sometimes at certain levels of Little League, I mean, anything can happen. The guy could put it right there across the plate. He could put it, anywhere. So it takes a good bit of courage to sort of dig in and stand there at the plate in a Little League game because you got no idea where some of those pitches are coming, for sure. All right, final comments. We're going to get ready to go. Let me go back to YouTube. Frederick Meredith says the Braves are going to win the series in November, putting it on a tee for the Dogs to go for the three-peat in January. Frederick, I like the way you think. That's good. Ben Gunnell says we need to ditch Baba O'Reilly. Totally disagree. I think the Baba O'Reilly thing works so well. And this is one of those things where, like, the average Georgia fan just loves it. I don't agree with that. I have seen a pocket of Georgia fans online that sometimes complain about it. I'm just telling you right now. That is a very online opinion. The average Georgia fan loves the Baba O'Reilly thing. Colby Strotter asking whether or not Boom, the brand new UGA, makes a name for himself in his rookie season. Boy, wouldn't you love to see that? Wouldn't you love to see him a la UGA against Robert Baker and Auburn? Maybe there'll be a little bit of a repeat of that. Let's see what else. Yeah, I'm not even really quite so sure why I like the Baba O'Reilly thing as much as I do, because at face value, it might not seem like it would be an obvious song for, a beginning of a game thing like that. But I just think it works really well. It kind of builds to a fun crescendo. And plus, it's one of those things that, Georgia's been doing it for a while now. All right, anything else? Before we get ready to go. We're getting ready to wrap up here, looks like. Paul Moon also likes it there as well. And yeah, I mean, the thing about the Baba O'Reilly deal is like that song was popular way before I was born. But there's also people way younger than me who seem to like it there as well. Like that, it's an older song, but it's not just the olds who enjoy that. Like I think a lot of people who are younger kind of enjoy that a pretty good bit there as well. All right, we're gonna go. Thanks for everybody for being here. Mark Godfrey says, is that really true? It was the last song that 96 Rock played on its last day? I did not know that. That's really interesting. It's amazing to me, if you live in the Atlanta area, you kind of remember old radio. It's amazing to me how many like 96 Rock like license plates, front of car license plates I still see. It's like amazing. There's just still some of the, and I know like some of the classic stations have been brought back. I guess like 99X is back now. But like it seems like there's still a lot of like sort of cultural love for 96 Rock all these years later, which I think is kind of amazing. All right, go to AJC.com. You can read some interesting stuff. Final of the series for the Braves and Mets. Spencer Strider on the mound. That's probably bad news for New York. So there you go there on that. That should be a lot of fun. Also, Falcons OTAs, that's been ongoing. Kind of thinking about, new look for the Falcons this year as Arthur Smith tries to improve the fortunes of that franchise. You get a chance to do that. You can find more of that online at ajc.com there as well. Also, all kinds of fun stuff heading towards the weekend. Big preview of everything there. You can get that too. And also our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time, and they'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. We talk about the AC units stuff all the time, but if you've got a plumbing issue, you can trust R.S. Andrews for that there, too. You know what that feels like. You go to take a shower, all of a sudden the water's cold. It's not supposed to be. That means your water heater might need to be replaced. You don't want to ruin your whole weekend on something like that. So if you've got that issue that pops up with you, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that water heater the same day. So make sure you find them online at rsandrews.com for more on that. So I'll see you back here tomorrow. We'll do our R.S. Andrews cool down when it's all said and done. DawgNation Daily presented by Meriwether and Tharp prior to that. 9:45 for our first and 15 at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, 10 a.m. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We will talk to you then. Close out the week strong. Fun special guest tomorrow. Jake Fromm is going to be with us. So we'll do that then and see you then for DawgNation Daily presented by Meriwether and Tharp and our R.S. Andrews cool down when it's all said and done. Talk to you then, everybody.